Rachel Thompson had always envisioned a perfect future. She dreamed of walking down the aisle in a white gown, her fiancé, Daniel Carter, waiting at the altar with a look of pure love in his eyes. Their love story had been nothing short of a fairy tale. They met in college, built a strong relationship over the years, and now, after 3 years together, they were engaged. Friends and family admired their bond, often calling them the perfect couple. Rachel worked as a school teacher, passionate about helping children grow. Daniel was a software engineer, hardworking and dedicated to his career. They had just moved into a cozy apartment in their quiet suburban neighborhood, planning their future together. Every weekend they discussed wedding plans, choosing flowers, finalizing the guest list, and looking at honeymoon destinations. Their excitement was contagious, and those around them couldn't wait for the big day. Rachel's mother, Linda Thompson, played a significant role in their lives. She was a well-respected nurse who had spent years working in the medical field. As a single mother, she had raised Rachel alone after her husband's tragic death in a car accident. The bond between mother and daughter was strong, built on years of love, trust, and support. Linda was deeply involved in the wedding preparations, often helping Rachel make decisions and offering advice. To everyone, Linda was a kind and devoted mother, always putting her daughter's happiness above all else. She had spent years ensuring Rachel had a good life, working tirelessly to provide for her. People admired her strength and resilience. But beneath this image of a loving, selfless woman, Linda carried secrets she never intended to reveal. As the wedding day approached, Daniel began to notice subtle changes in Linda's behavior. She had always been close to him, treating him like a son, but recently her actions felt different. Her hugs lingered a little too long, her compliments had an unusual tone, and sometimes he caught her looking at him in a way that made him uncomfortable. At first he dismissed it as overthinking. Linda had always been affectionate, and she adored him like family. Rachel, completely unaware, continued to believe her life was unfolding exactly as she had imagined. She was busy with work, wedding plans, and setting up their new home. She never questioned why Daniel sometimes seemed distracted, or why Linda occasionally acted distant when they talked about the future. She assumed it was just nerves after all. Weddings could be overwhelming. Then there were the late-night phone calls. Daniel would step outside to take them, speaking in hushed tones. Rachel, trusting him completely, never pried. He told her it was work-related, and she believed him. What she didn't know was that those calls had nothing to do with work. They were filled with tension, regret, and a secret that, if exposed, would shatter everything. Unbeknownst to Rachel, the perfect life she cherished was already beginning to crumble. The betrayal was unfolding right under her nose, and soon it would lead to a tragedy no one could have foreseen. It started innocently enough, small conversations that felt harmless. Linda Thompson had always been close to Daniel, treating him like a son, but somewhere along the way, her feelings shifted into something far more dangerous. She had spent years devoted to being a mother, never allowing herself the luxury of romance after her husband's death. But Daniel was different. He was kind, charming, and everything she had once desired in a man. The way he spoke, the way he carried himself, it stirred something in her she had long buried. At first she convinced herself it was nothing more than admiration. He was going to marry her daughter, and it made sense that she felt a deep connection with him. But the lines blurred when their conversations became more personal. Daniel would confide in her about his stress at work, his worries about the future, and even his occasional doubts about marriage. Linda listened, offering comfort, always knowing the right words to say. She told herself she was just being supportive, but deep down, she knew she wanted more. One evening, after Rachel had gone to bed, Daniel stayed back at Linda's house longer than usual. They sat in the dimly lit living room, sipping wine and talking about life. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. Linda placed a reassuring hand on his knee, a gesture that lasted a second too long. Daniel didn't move away. It was the first moment of silent acknowledgement between them, a dangerous invitation neither was willing to refuse. What followed was a series of encounters that neither could stop. Late-night meetings, stolen glances, and whispered conversations turned into something far more intimate. It was reckless, but the thrill of secrecy made it impossible to resist. Daniel felt guilty, but he couldn't pull himself away. There was something about Linda, her confidence, her experience, the way she made him feel seen in a way Rachel never did. For Linda, it was an awakening. After years of dedicating herself to motherhood, she finally felt desired again. She convinced herself that what they had was real, that Daniel's presence in her life wasn't just coincidence but fate. She ignored the consequences, believing that he felt the same way, that maybe, in some twisted way, he belonged with her instead of Rachel. The affair continued in secret, hidden behind innocent smiles and casual family dinners. Rachel remained oblivious, trusting both her mother and fiancé without question. She planned for a future with Daniel while he spent nights tangled in deception. Every day the weight of his double life grew heavier, yet he couldn't stop himself. But Linda had a secret of her own, one that she hadn't told anyone. A truth that, if revealed, would change everything. She had been living with HIV for years, quietly managing it with medication, never thinking it would become anyone else's problem. But now, she had unknowingly passed it to Daniel, setting in motion a chain of events that would soon turn deadly. Daniel's body began to betray him in ways he couldn't understand. At first, it was subtle, constant fatigue, headaches, and an occasional fever that he brushed off as stress. Planning a wedding while managing work pressure seemed like enough of a reason for his exhaustion. But as weeks passed, the symptoms worsened. He lost weight rapidly. His skin grew pale, and his muscles ached even when he wasn't exerting himself. The fatigue became unbearable, leaving him drained even after hours of sleep. Rachel noticed the changes and urged him to see a doctor, but he dismissed her concerns. He didn't want to worry her. Deep down, he feared the worst, though he couldn't explain why. His mind searched for logical reasons. Maybe it was just burnout. Maybe he wasn't eating well, or maybe he had caught a virus. But something inside him whispered that it was more than that. After weeks of persistent symptoms, he finally gave in and scheduled an appointment. The doctor ran a series of tests, assuring him that they would find the cause. Daniel left the clinic with a strange sense of unease, a fear that clung to him like a shadow. When the results came back, his world collapsed. He had tested positive for HIV. The words hit him like a wrecking ball, shattering every sense of reality he had. It wasn't possible. He had been faithful to Rachel. There had been no reckless encounters, no mistakes except one. His heart pounded as the realization sank in. There was only one way this could have happened. Linda. The room seemed to close in on him as he pieced everything together. He remembered the first time, the whispered promises, the stolen moments that had once felt thrilling. Now they felt like a death sentence. The betrayal was deeper than he had ever imagined. She had known. She had to have known. And yet she had said nothing. Let this happen, let him walk straight into his own destruction. Rage boiled inside him, but beneath it was something worse, fear. What if Rachel had it too? The thought sent him spiraling. He couldn't face her, couldn't tell her the truth. He had ruined not just his own life, but possibly hers as well. How could he explain what he had done? That the man she loved, the man she trusted, had been sleeping with her own mother behind her back, and worse, that he might have put her life at risk. Panic consumed him. He needed answers, needed confirmation, needed to hear it from Linda's own mouth. He grabbed his keys and drove to her house, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His pulse pounded in his ears as he knocked on the door. When Linda opened it, her expression shifted from surprise to something darker, something that confirmed his worst fears. She knew. She had always known. And she had said nothing. The rage inside him reached its breaking point. Linda had not only betrayed Rachel, but she had sentenced him to a future he never asked for, and for that he would make her pay. Daniel's mind was a storm of rage and despair as he stood in front of Linda, his body trembling with anger. He could barely think, barely breathe. His life was over, and she was the reason. The woman who was supposed to be a mother, a protector, had destroyed him in ways he never thought possible. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but no words came. Linda's face remained calm, almost indifferent, as if she had already accepted what she had done. He pushed past her into the house, his breath ragged, his heart pounding against his ribs. The memories of their affair flashed through his mind, the whispered secrets, the stolen moments, the way she had made him feel special. Now it all felt sickening. Every touch, every glance had been laced with a deadly secret. He had trusted her. He had believed her. And she had taken everything from him. Linda closed the door and faced him, her expression unreadable. There was no fear, no regret, just an eerie stillness. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted her to explain, to beg for forgiveness, to show some kind of remorse, but she said nothing. The silence was unbearable. Then she spoke, her voice calm and steady. She told him she had been living with HIV for years, that it wasn't intentional, that she had never meant to hurt him, but her words felt empty, hollow. Intentional or not, she had ruined his life. And now she stood there, acting as if it was just another mistake. Something inside Daniel snapped. His body moved before his mind could process it. He grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass paperweight, from the table and threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall, the sound echoing through the house. Linda flinched but didn't step back. She simply watched him, waiting. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. He took a step closer, his rage blinding. He had never been a violent man, never even raised his voice in anger before. But this wasn't just anger, this was betrayal in its purest form. His future was gone. His relationship with Rachel was destroyed. He was facing a lifetime of suffering, and Linda was the reason. His hand shook as he reached for a kitchen knife from the counter. The cold steel felt foreign in his grip, but the weight of his fury made it feel natural. Linda's eyes finally widened, a flicker of realization passing through them. She took a step back, but there was nowhere to run. A scream cut through the night as Daniel lunged forward. The knife plunged into Linda's chest, her body jerking from the impact. Blood spread across her shirt, pooling onto the floor. She gasped, her eyes locking onto his one last time before her body collapsed. The house fell into an eerie silence. Daniel stood over her, panting, his hands stained with blood. The rage that had consumed him only moments ago was replaced with something else, emptiness. He had gotten his revenge, but it wouldn't change anything. His life was still over, and now he was a murderer. The house was silent except for the sound of Daniel's heavy breathing. His hands trembled as he stared down at Linda's lifeless body, the blood spreading across the cold tile floor. The knife was still clutched in his fingers, its steel now coated in deep red. A wave of nausea hit him as reality settled in. She was dead. He had killed her. His mind raced. There was no undoing what had just happened. He had been consumed by rage, but now all that was left was emptiness. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him, suffocating, inescapable. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he tried to think. He needed to leave. He needed to run. But where? How? His whole life had already crumbled. There was nowhere to go. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Then the sound of a car pulling up outside jolted him back to reality. His body stiffened as panic surged through him. He recognized the sound. It was Rachel. She was here. His breath hitched as he looked around, searching for a way out, but there was none. His hands were stained with blood. The knife was on the floor. There was no time to clean up, no way to hide what had happened. The front door creaked open, and Rachel's voice called out, "Mom?" Daniel froze. He couldn't move. His feet felt rooted to the ground as she stepped into the house. The moment she saw Linda's body, time seemed to stop. A sharp gasp left her lips as she stumbled backward, her hands flying to her mouth. Her eyes darted from the blood-soaked floor to Daniel, and in that instant she knew. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't scream. She just stood there, shaking her head, as if refusing to believe what she was seeing. Why? The word barely escaped her lips, but it hit Daniel like a hammer. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, but what could he say? How could he tell her the truth? That he had been sleeping with her mother. That he had been infected with a disease that would change his life forever. That his rage had taken over and he had done the unthinkable. There were no words that could make this right. Rachel didn't wait for an answer. She stumbled backward, fumbling for her phone. Daniel's heart sank as he realized what she was doing. Seconds later, the sound of her shaky voice filled the room as she called 911. The sirens came quickly. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls as officers stormed into the house. Daniel didn't resist. He couldn't. He felt numb as they pulled his hands behind his back, the cold steel of the handcuffs snapping around his wrists. The trial was swift. The truth about the affair and Linda's HIV diagnosis came to light, shocking everyone. Rachel never visited him in prison. She disappeared from the public eye, wanting nothing to do with the nightmare that had unfolded. Daniel was sentenced to life. Sitting in his cell, he realized that revenge had given him nothing. He had lost everything, and now all he had left was time to remember, to regret, and to suffer in the silence of his own making.